Good afternoon, class. This is Mr. Hart with Sacred Hearts High School Psychology. So today we're going to dive into the DSM-4 a little bit. DSM-4, as we've talked about in previous lessons, stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, version 4, text revision. This is the last version. Right now we're currently in the DSM-5, which will become standard in September of 2015. But this is the manual for psychological disorders and their symptoms. So there are 5 axes in the DSM-4, which include clinical disorders, personality disorders, general medical conditions, psychosocial and environmental problems, and a global assessment of functioning. Over 1/5 of all the adults over age 18 suffer from some type of mental disorder in any given year. So 1 out of 5, that's quite a bit, 20%. So major depression is one of the most common psychological disorders worldwide. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at what does it take to be clinically diagnosed with major depression. So diagnosis of depression, you have to meet criteria. So this is the criteria that's listed in the DSM-4. So if you look on here, at least 5 of the following symptoms have been present during the same 2-week period and represent a change from the previous functioning. At least one of the symptoms is either depressed mood or loss of interest. So for example, if you had 6 of these symptoms, one was depressed mood, but it only lasted for 1 week and 5 days, that would not meet the criteria. If you had 4 symptoms present and it lasted for 2 weeks and it was one of depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure, you would not meet the criteria. So the DSM-4 is very specific on what it needs to happen, what needs to be in place for a diagnosis to be made. So again, at least 5 of the following symptoms present for the same 2-week period represent a change from previous functioning, and at least one of the symptoms is depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure. So the 5 criteria here are depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated by subjective report, meaning talking about the individual saying they feel that way, feels sad, feels empty, or an observation made by others, appears tearful. So this could be by somebody seeing them or them reporting that themselves. The second criteria is markedly diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities most of the day, nearly every day. Again, as indicated by themselves or by somebody else's observation. Significant weight loss when not dieting or weight gain. A decrease or increase in appetite nearly every day. The 4th criteria is insomnia or hypersomnia nearly every day. So not being able to sleep or sleeping too much. And these again have to be a change from previous functioning and lasting for 2 weeks. Psychomotor agitation or retardation nearly every day. Not merely of subjective feelings of restlessness or being slowed down. So this is where their physical movement is either agitated, which means increased, or retarded, which means lowered. So this is again observed by others or a subjective observation. Number 6, fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. Feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt, which may be delusional, nearly every day, not merely self-reported or guilt about being sick. Diminished ability to think or concentrate or indecisiveness nearly every day. Again, these have to be a change from previous functioning, be present during the same 2-week period, and have to include depressed mood or loss of pleasure or interest. And you have to have 5 of these. The last one, number 9, recurrent thoughts of death, not just a fear of dying, recurrent suicidal ideation without a specific plan, or a suicide attempt, or a specific plan for committing suicide. So, in order to be diagnosed so far, you would have to meet 5 of these. They have to be present during the same 2-week period. They need to represent a change from previous functioning, and at least one of the symptoms is a depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure. So depressed mood or loss of interest, pleasure in all things, needs to be, so 1 or 2 needs to be met with an additional minimum of 4 other ones. So you have to have one or both of these plus an extra amount of these, that equals 5. Now here, then after you have the criteria, then you also have some disclaimers or things to rule out. So the symptoms do not meet criteria for a mixed episode. So this just means that mixed episode, you have mania mixed in there, which would then be classified as a bipolar disorder, which is a manic episode and a depressed episode. So the symptoms do not meet criteria for that. The symptoms cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So they can meet all of these things up here, but if it does not impair their social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning, which would be like family or school for students, then criteria is not met. So they need to meet these criteria up here, and if it doesn't cause impairment, if they're still able to get through the day and get their jobs done that they're expected to do, it would not be diagnosable as a depressive episode. So again, these criteria needs to be met. They do not meet criteria for a mixed episode, and it's clinically significant impairment. So they are not able to do what they typically are or are expected to do in the areas of their lives. The symptoms are not due to direct physiological effects of substance abuse or general medical conditions. So this cannot be like you're under the influence of depression causing drugs, or you don't have a general medical condition like hypothyroidism, brain damage. So if those things are present, then that you would not be diagnosed as major depressive disorder, because the general medical condition or the effects of the substance would be the cause of this versus major depression. The symptoms are not better accounted for by bereavement, the loss of a loved one. The symptoms persist for longer than 2 months, are characterized by a marked functional impairment, morbid preoccupation with worthlessness, suicidal ideation, psychotic symptoms, or psychomotor retardation. So what the DSM tries to do is find the most accurate diagnosis relevant to the individual. So you need to meet this criteria, including one of these. It has to be a change from previous functioning, must be present during the same 2-week period, and at least 5 of these symptoms, including 1 or 2 or both, number 1, number 2, or both. So that's it. That's how you get diagnosed with a major depressive episode. So if you have a major depressive episode, you can then be classified as having a major depressive disorder. So that is just the presence of a single major depressive episode, which we just classified up here. The major depressive episode is not better accounted for by schizoaffective disorder and is not superimposed on schizophrenia, schizophreniform disorder, delusional disorder, or psychotic disorder not otherwise specified. And there has never been a manic episode, a mixed episode, or a hypomanic episode. So in order to be diagnosed with a major depressive disorder, having depression, you would have had to have at least 1 episode, no mania, no mixed episode, no hypomania, and it's not better accounted for by some other disorder. So other disorders do have depressive symptoms in there, but for example, if you're suffering from manic episodes, bipolar would be more accurate than depression alone. So major depressive order recurrent criteria, presence of 2 or more major depressive episodes, each separated by at least 2 months, in which criteria are not met for a major depressive episodes. The major depressive episodes are not better accounted for by schizoaffective disorder and are not superimposed on schizophrenia, schizophreniform disorder, delusional disorder, or psychotic disorder not otherwise specified. So there's never been a manic episode, a mixed episode, or hypomanic episode. So ladies and gentlemen, this is how you get diagnosed with depression. You need to meet this criteria, and then once that's met, you can get diagnosed with this. And one of the rules of thumb, as I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor, we don't want to overdiagnose. And you can see with these symptoms, so it's at least 5 of these 9. So one person's depression can look a lot different than someone else's. So it's really important not to just look, oh, he's depressed. Well, we know they have these things. Really all we know if somebody's depressed is they have to have 1 or 2 numbers, criteria 1, criteria 2, and then they have to have a combination of 3 to 4 of these for a total of 5. So really all we know then is that depressed mood or marked diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities is presence, one of those 2, and then any combination of the following ones. So depression is a diagnosis to help people treat people that have diagnoses. So if they come into counseling and they have a history of depression, we're going to look for depressive symptoms, and we're going to try to develop a treatment plan to help them overcome that in ways that are effective and successful for them. So ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Have a great day.